Well, good morning. It's good to be here and with Cameron and his family, and with Ricky and his. I knew Cameron when Cameron was like 18 or 19. So if you're just looking for stories, I got them, and but probably too many to start with today. We'd crowd out the sermon time. This particular passage, when I read it the first time after Ricky sent it to me, I thought, well, this is the kind of passage that I would give to somebody else to preach too. I read it to my wife, and she said, wow, he gave you a wrath-only passage. That's fantastic. It's an interesting passage, interesting text. Very important text, though, and so I want to read it. And if you will, if you could follow along with me, turn your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 9, and we're going to begin reading in verse 8. We're going to go all the way down through Isaiah chapter 10, verse 4. Isaiah chapter 9, beginning with verse 8. The Lord has sent a word against Jacob, and it will fall on Israel, and all the people will know. Ephraim and the inhabitants of Samaria, who say in pride and in arrogance of heart, the bricks have fallen, but we will build with dressed stones. The sycamores have been cut down, but we'll put cedars in their place. But the Lord raises the adversaries of Rezin against him, stirs up his enemies. The Syrians on the east, the Philistines on the west, devour Israel with open mouth. For all this, his anger has not turned away. His hand is stretched out still. The people did not turn to him who struck them, nor inquire of the Lord of hosts. So the Lord cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. The elder and the honored man is the head, the prophet who teaches lies is the tail. For those who guide this people have been leading them astray, and those who are guided by them are swallowed up. And therefore the Lord does not rejoice over the young men, has no compassion on their fatherless and widows. For everyone is godless and an evildoer, and every mouth speaks folly. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. For wickedness burns like fire. It consumes briars and thorns. It kindles the thickets of the forest. They roll upward in a column of smoke. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched, and the people are like fuel for the fire. No one spares another. They slice meat on the right, but are still hungry. They devour on the left, but are not satisfied. Each devours the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devours Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. Together, they are against Judah. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. Woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees and the writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice, to rob the poor of my people of their right, that widows may be their spoil and that they may make the fatherless their prey. What will you do on the day of punishment, in the ruin that will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help? Where will you leave your wealth? Nothing remains but to crouch among the prisoners or fall among the slain. For all this, his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. This is the word of the Lord. If I had a theme today, the theme would be, if you're taking notes, the wrath of God embraced and exhausted. Embraced and exhausted. In order to really understand this text, you have to back up substantially from the text itself and get a broader view of what's going on. If you look back, for example, in Isaiah chapter 1, you have Isaiah providing for the reader the sort of the big problem that is the basis of all the prophets. If you look in chapter 1 and just go right to verse 2 and 3. Hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth, for the Lord has spoken. Children have I reared and brought up, but they've rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, the donkey its master's crib, but Israel does not know. My people don't understand. If there was a first point here, it would be this: forgetting who God is the larger problem for Isaiah. Forgetting who God is. The problem with Israel, of course, is they are the covenant people. They're unique in all the world. In Exodus 19, God says to Israel, the entire earth belongs to me, but only you are my treasured possession. And so in this moment of redemption history, Israel is uniquely God's people in a way that no one else is. They have a relationship that no one else does, and they also have a mission that no one else does. Their entire reality is to be this fishbowl community that the nations can look in and see the reality of God. The God of the Old Testament, the God of the Bible, is a radically different take on God than anyone else in the Old Testament, anyone else in the ancient Near East. I would argue still to this day, anyone else in modern religion. Most modern religions are preempted by this idea that there's a deity or deities somewhere out there, and that all you have to do is figure out the right actions to take, the right way to live, the right way to commit, which perhaps political way to vote. And then the more you do that, the more you humane, the more you commit, the more you're socially active, the more you're genuinely this or that, and that God accepts you. Whatever it is that you're willing to risk is a thing that baits that deity's affections. But that's not the God of the Bible. God of the Bible looks at Israel and says, I chose you not because there was anything particularly good about you, but because I set my heart on you. Unmeritorious. And at some point, Israel does exactly what everyone tends to do, and that is they trade in the real God for a more culturally consistent take on God. So when I grew up in the state of Alabama, and I realized that my accent doesn't sound like that. I know that what people expect to hear when I tell them I'm from Alabama is they think I'm supposed to talk like this. But my family does. But for whatever reason, my brother and I didn't. We think that our mother probably did something to us to coax that out. She made there was no secret that she thought all of our friends were stupid. And so I think that she probably did something to both my brother and I, because we both sound like we're from where our family came from, and rather than from Alabama. But I did grow up in Alabama, buckle of the Bible Belt. And the idea of God in that state during my period of time in the 60s and 70s and early 80s was pretty much an extrapolation, it was derived from Southern culture. So they talked about things that they thought were sinful in their own minds. They really weren't sinful in the Bible, but they talked about them like they were. They refused to talk about things that were definitely sinful in the Bible, but to their culture, it wasn't. To our culture, it wasn't. So we didn't talk about them that way. We didn't talk about those as sin. And at some point, for myself, I decided that all of it was nonsense. I became an atheist. And was an atheist through most of my college days. I had no real need for a God to simply be an extension of my grandparents. This had to be something more than that. I think it's a normal thing to do, to trade God in on a better cultural model. So if you're from a red state, you trade God in on something that looks far more like the Republican National Committee. If you're from a blue state, you trade God in on what looks far more like the Democratic National Committee. You trade God in on the things that you struggled with. If you struggled with alcohol, then you talk about alcohol like it's sin, even though the Bible never talks about that. If you struggled with intimacy issues, then you heighten and you talk about that just like it was talked about, sex was talked about like it was horrible when I was a kid. It was on the same list with drugs and rock and roll. I don't know who put that and that and rock and roll on the same list as drugs, but that's a horrible decision, since rock and roll and intimacy are fantastic, and drugs not so much. But the idea is it came from the culture I was in. That's what drove it. It's an easy thing to do. It's just to exchange the real God for the fake one, and you certainly have that. It's exactly what happens. In fact, because this text focuses on the northern kingdom, Israel, this is depicted all the way through the book of Kings. If you want to read this, it's in 1 Kings chapter 12. But after Solomon's son rips the kingdom apart, Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, takes 10 tribes, goes to the north, and makes what he calls Israel. Capital is Samaria. That's what we just read about a while ago. And he gets up there and he starts thinking, if feast days come around and everybody travels back to Jerusalem, they're going to kill me and they're going to go back to Rehoboam. They're going to go back to the house of David. I can't have that. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a whole another religion. I'm going to call it the same. Tell everybody that we're worshiping Yahweh just like Judah's worshiping Yahweh. We're going to set up 2 different temples, one in Dan, one in Bethel. 2 different shrines, sort of, Ark of the Covenant wannabes in both of these temples. We're going to recast the religious calendar. We're going to let anybody that wants to, and you know how that works, right? Anybody with enough shekels gets to be priest. We're going to set up high places. The whole reason he creates this religion is just to prop up his own political welfare. It's a completely false religion. What Jeroboam does, and what we see Isaiah speaking to, is a very common idea. Forgetting God and forgetting who God is significant. And it's the basis of all of this. But what is the result of that? Second point would be this. Wrath is the result of replacing God. Wrath is the result of replacing God. Here in this text, you have verses 8 through 12, beginning in 9, that depict this national disaster. Jacob, Israel, Ephraim, all those names, by the way, are the same entity. They're the same political entity as the northern kingdom of Israel. 10 tribes up to the north call themselves Israel, capital is Samaria. And they're called Jacob at times, Israel at times, Ephraim at times. And they're called 3 right here. And Ephraim falls, Israel falls, and they still say, okay, fine. The bricks have fallen, sycamores have been cut down, we'll replace them. No biggie. We'll take care of it. The Lord, though, it says, raises up adversaries in Syria, in Philistia, and they still don't get it. And it says the Syrians on the east and the Philistines on the west devour them. And then the prophet says this refrain, his anger has not turned away. His hand is stretched out still. And then he doubles down, verses 13 through 17. Here, not only do you have national disaster happen, but the political collapse. The people did not turn away from him who struck him, nor inquire of the Lord of hosts, same one. God is the one doing the striking. And so God cut off from Israel head and tail, palm branch and reed in one day. Talks about the exile as this swift military kind of move. And the prophet and the elder are both taken away. All of these people who have taught them this, all of these people who have taken the idea of God and culturally shaped it so that it exists to prop up the politics of the north. That's who he destroys in one day. I'll show you how bad this is. So Jeroboam does this in 931 BC, and by 722 BC, which this text is written around, we have another ruler, and his name is Jeroboam II. Number 2, they're not related, but that's his name. And Amos shows up. Amos is prophesying, he's preaching the same moment as Isaiah is doing. Amos shows up in the north, which is kind of weird because Amos is a southerner, like me, talking to a bunch of Californians. And so a southerner. And he shows up in the north, and he torpedoes Jeroboam. And Amaziah, the high priest, says, hey, to Jeroboam, you've got to do something about this guy, because you're not going to be able to survive this kind of rhetoric coming from someone who's claiming to be a prophet. People are going to start thinking bad things about you. They're going to start expecting that we're going to collapse. Amos, in their mind, was a traitor because he was saying that Jeroboam was going to die. Israel was going to go into exile. You can almost hear it. How dare you? We're the chosen people. Why do you think God would ever send us into exile? That's exactly what's going to happen. Amaziah points to Amos and he says, go home, little seer. Go prophesy back in the south. Go eat your bread back in the south. And listen to what he says. Never again prophesy at Bethel, for it is the king's sanctuary. It is the temple of the kingdom. He doesn't even bother with the pretense of saying this is God's house. He just says this belongs to Jeroboam. This temple, this religion, these confessions belong to Jeroboam. Weirdly enough, Amaziah is like one of the most honest guys in Scripture because he recognizes and simply extols that the whole purpose of religion is to simply build up and prop up this immediate political reality of Jeroboam. But here in Isaiah 9:13-17, God says, no more. And he just wipes them out. He wipes them out completely. And it's not just them, but look at verse 17. 17 is tough. The Lord does not rejoice over their young men. And he has no compassion on their fatherless and widows. Why, you might ask? Because that does not sound like God. For everyone is godless and an evildoer. Every mouth speaks folly. In other words, this is pervasive. This is a pervasive idea. You can't just apply this to America. I know that's the favorite kind of thing to do. But these are people that have a covenant with God. America has never had a covenant with God, but these people do. They're supposed to be God's people. And this is their description. Everyone is godless. Everyone is an evildoer. Every mouth speaks foolishness. And for this his anger is not turned away, and his hand is stretched out still. But not only is the nation collapsing, and not only is their political leadership removed from them almost instantaneously, but also verses 18-21 finish out chapter 9 with complete social anarchy. The wrath of God manifests itself in this spirit of total concern, of total self-concern, rather. Listen to this. Wickedness burns like fire, consumes briars and thorns, kindles the thickets of the forest, rolls upward in smoke, portrays wickedness as this forest fire, something that all of us in California can relate to. Through the wrath of the Lord of hosts, the land is scorched. The people are like fuel for the fire. No one spares another. They don't care about one another. They eat meat over here, claim they're still hungry. They eat meat over here and claim they're not satisfied. And then it's got this super weird text. Each devours the flesh of his own arm. Manasseh devours Ephraim. Ephraim devours Manasseh. Now, if you can reach way back in your vacation Bible school days, remember Ephraim and Manasseh are both sons of Joseph. And so they're the house of Joseph. They're brothers. But right here, they're devouring one another. Not only do you have national disaster collapsing, not only do you have political collapse, but you also have this social anarchy where people have no concern or care for one another. Now, the fact of the matter is this has been going on in the 8th century. The difference is the powerful in the 8th century, both in Judah and in Samaria, were able to maintain this lack of concern for their brothers in a politically stable environment. So Isaiah puts the ruling class in Judah on blast. Your hands are full of blood. He tells them, don't offer me any more sacrifices. Quit praying to me. Quit singing to me. I won't listen to any of them because your hands are full of blood. You don't do justice with the widow or the sojourner or the orphan. You don't offer anything but oppression. So don't come and sing songs to me. It's an amazing, brutal text. Isaiah 58, he does the same thing. He says, quit fasting. You want to know the type of fast I like? Here's the type of fast I like. Bring in the naked and the poor into your homes. Feed them, clothe them, make them your own. They're your brothers. He's talking about people in Israel being unjust to people in Israel. If we wanted to shift that to today, he would be talking about the people of God, Christians, acting unjustly towards each other. Perhaps just simply swallowing the Kool-Aid of whichever news station that you're watching and letting that become your identity, rather than the idea that you've been rescued by Christ and bound to people who don't look like you, will never be like you. But they are responsible for you and you for them. In this text, God lambasts his own people because the one thing they're supposed to be, they're not. This fishbowl community where the nations can look in and they can see the reality of God played out in their social and systemic structures, played out in the way that they worship, played out in the way that they treat one another. And yet here, it's just the opposite. And that kind of immorality escalates in the first 4 verses of chapter 10. Not only do you have national disaster, not only do you have political collapse, not only do you have social anarchy, but you also have this moral perversion. Verse 1, woe to those who decree iniquitous decrees, and writers who keep writing oppression, to turn aside the needy from justice, to rob the poor of my people of their right. The widows may be their spoil, and that they may make the fatherless their prey. All the way through the book of Amos, you have Amos condemning the leaders in Israel, same place, northern kingdom of Israel, for their treatment of the poor, for their inclination to oppress, for their ability to simply forget. Places like Deuteronomy 15, there shall be no poor among you. Places like Deuteronomy 6, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, all your mind and all your strength. Leviticus 19:28, to love your neighbor, that's your fellow covenanter, as yourself. They've forgotten all this. And they've just collapsed into this aristocratic haves and have-nots. And they live their lives like that while at the same time trying to confess this unique God who rescued them out of Egypt. It plays itself out in social ideology. And then this is what he says, and this carries us into our next and our last text. What will you do on the day of punishment in the ruin that comes from afar? To whom will you flee? That's a good question. Because the fact of the matter is the Bible describes all of us as it's describing the northern kingdom. Romans chapter 5, but Christ died for us while we were still his enemies. John chapter 3, verse 36, those who don't believe in the Son, the wrath of God remains on you. Romans chapter 2, beginning with verse 18, going through, or 8 and go through 10. It's a remarkable text. There is no one who fears God. There is no one who is righteous. There is no one who is good. There is no one who seeks God. No one, no one, no one. And the reason is because we don't want a God naturally who we can't control. Most people, like when I mentioned in my class at the university that the idea that biblical writers had was that human beings have this natural propensity to actually hate God. And immediately hands go up. people who are not Christians, they'll go, hey, Dr. Mooney, okay, fine. That I'm sure that that kind of that kind of sunshine you're blowing goes great with the Christian crowd. But I'm not a Christian. I don't hate God. Oh. Can we test that? So do you love a God who you cannot control? They go, what are you talking about? I say, well, like, for example, if I was to describe God like this, all loving, never judges, always accepting, isn't that the God? That's who you think God is, right? And they go, yeah, of course. I said, well, that's the problem, right? That's not God in the Bible. It's not God in the Bible at all. God is God of the Bible is the one who, in Deuteronomy 7, tells Israel to go and slaughter everyone inside the city. After Job has all these horrible things happen to him, God shows up in chapter 38 through 41 and basically tells him, I'm not going to tell you why this has happened, but don't you dare question me again. Is that the God you like? They go, no, that's not the God I'm talking about. I say, see, that's what I mean. We're all disposed to only believe in a God that we can control, only believe in a God that we can arrest, only believe in a God that we can shape into who we want. In other words, we do naturally what we see Jeroboam doing. And at some point, we confess openly and naturally what we saw Amaziah confessing. And the answer to that is wrath. And the question with that is, what will we do? Who will you trust? Who will you go to? Do you think it's you? Do you think that you can make decisions in your life, that you can craft your own mind and heart in such a way that you can make the correct moral decisions that, in fact, God would then respond to you? That's an interesting idea. I think that's every other religion in the world, but it's not this one. Because this one says, no one seeks God. No one fears God. No one. Then what can possibly happen? So this entire first part of this text has been the wrath of God embraced. The wrath of God is real. The wrath of God is exposed right here, not just simply on the national enemies of Israel, but on Israel. Don't get me wrong, that was a surprise to Israel. In fact, in the book of Amos, in chapter 5, Amos asks Israel, why do you want the day of the Lord to come? And the expected rhetorical answer is, well, because the enemies of God will be punished for good finally. And Amos looks up and goes, that's the problem though, isn't it? You're the enemies of God. They're like, no, it couldn't be us. We're wearing the right jersey. Our jersey says Yahweh on the front. We're good to go. We're from Abraham. And Amos says, it doesn't matter. The day of the Lord is going to be darkness for you, not light. It's like if a man was running away from a bear and ran into a lion. Or if he ran from the bear and the lion and ran into a house to get away from both of them and leaned up against the wall to hide, and a snake bit him. This is a bad day. No matter how you cut that. Being from Alabama, I never ran into a lion. I never ran into a bear that I was close enough to. I ran into bears in Tennessee more than I did Alabama. But snakes, plenty of snakes. We did our best to stay away from those things. If I thought I was being chased by a snake, that'd just absolutely be terrifying. And Amos says the day of the Lord is coming for you. That's the wrath of God embraced. But your trust and your hope is in the wrath of God exhausted. It's true that we're the enemies of God. And you see this all the way through the scriptures. Psalm chapter 2. Why do the nations rage, the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth take their stand against the Lord, against his anointed one. He who sits in heaven laughs. He installs his holy king on his holy mountain. God says, you've got to be joking. While he is expressing his wrath, he's also installing the one thing, the one person that will provide hope for all humanity. John 18, verse 1 through 14. Both state and religion, Jew and Gentile, blue collar and white collar, all show up to arrest Jesus. They hate the God that's in front of them. They choose to kill him in order to embrace the gods, their various gods that they already believe in. Christ, the true Son, the true Israel, becomes the focal point of God's wrath. And it happens in the crosshairs of people. The next chapter, whoever preaches that, beginning with verse 5, it's all about how the Assyrians, God uses the Assyrians to dominate Israel. And then he'll use the Babylonians to dominate Assyria. He'll use the Persians to dominate Babylon. He expresses his wrath in real time and in concrete ways, tangible ways. There's nothing Nirvana-esque about this. And so when Christ dies, it's portrayed in Romans chapter 3, later on in Hebrews chapter 2, 1 John chapter 2, as a propitiation. It's a big, big word that just simply means that Jesus has become the sacrifice that has absorbed the wrath of God and has appeased the justice of God. The wrath of God is very real. The only thing that can absorb the wrath of God is God. So Jesus comes to do that. And Jesus becomes this focal point. And so when you're looking at this prophetic text, this sounds just so terrible. But this is a unique type of divine authority. This is authority that has to move on sin, especially sin in the people of God. It's also authority that moves on all sin of humanity. But how does it do that? It's authority that saves on behalf or at the cost of its own self. God has all authority. Christ, in Matthew 28, all authority is given to him. If you had all authority, how would you act? You would most likely act just like our text, but with no real good news of the end. But we're stuck in Isaiah 9:8 through 10:4. Every one of you have children. I don't probably have to convince you that your kids are sinners. I have 4 kids and 6 grandkids. No doubt, they're all sinners. And we figured that out really early with our kids in different types. When you have multiple kids, they're all very different personalities. My son Jonathan, if I drew a line in the sand and said, "Do not cross that line," Jonathan would go, take a couple of steps back and run and just dive over the line. My daughter Karis would walk up to the line and place her toe just over it and smile and lean her head over it. They're both doing the same thing, rebelling against dad. Same exact thing, just 2 different ways. Jonathan, adventurous, throws himself in everything. He's a lot like me. Karis, far more, very, very aware of how adorable she is, and so decides to play that card. But all of it's sin. All of it's sin. My 2-year-old grandson, David, I had to go to Birmingham to be involved with this ceremony back at Beeson Divinity School, and so I stayed with my grandson and my son and daughter-in-law, and my son left the room, looks at my grandson, he says, "Do not give any of your sandwich to the dog." And David just looked at him, and as soon as Jonathan left the room, David reaches in, pulls all the meat out of his sandwich, and walks over and gives it to the dog. And I looked at David, I went, "Your dad just said not to do that." And my 2-year-old grandson turns out, looks at me, he goes, "Shh." 2 years old. It's incredible. That apple did not fall far from the tree. I don't want to make you think that I was better than that at 2. But I'm quite confident. He's named after me, and there's probably a reason for that. But that idea expresses the sinfulness in all of us. And of course, you can just probably think on, if you just meditate today, how have I naturally tried to replace God with gods that looked more like me, that felt more like me over my life. Is that kind of sin or is that hostile sin? It's hostile sin. All sin is hostile to God. God has divine authority, and instead of simply destroying us, he acts on our behalf. And this is the beauty of the gospel. The gospel says this: you are 1,000 times more sinful than you're willing to admit, and 1,000,000 times more loved than you're ever daring to hope. God has seen you. He knows that you are helpless to do anything about this. He knows that you, like Amaziah, simply are caught up in the definitions of who God is, the definitions of who the people of God are. And you probably have a load of those ideas in your mind. Like Jeroboam, just simply afraid of the world around you. And so you utilize God in order to try to insulate yourself. God simply has become an object to be used rather than the eternal king who reigns forever, who is not derivative of any kind of political reality, not derivative of any cultural reality, stands on his own and redeems people for himself, purifies them by his grace, draws them to himself, gives them to one another in local churches. You could be an outpost of the kingdom, a little fishbowl community that this world around you can look in and they can see the reality of the gospel played out. That's the idea. The wrath of God is not just simply met in the cross, it's exhausted in the cross. And so as we live not with the fear of Isaiah 9:8 through 10:4 hanging over us, but with the reality that this could certainly be us. I mean, if you want to try to do this one-to-one kind of analogy, which I wouldn't advise, but if you want to do this one-to-one analogy with Isaiah and you and I here in America, okay, we'll go through the little exercise there. Number one, what you can't do, you're not Israel. The Old Testament is not written to you, it's written for you. And so, in fact, we read that today in Romans, written for our instruction. That's exactly right. And so what is it that instructs us? Well, we're the covenant people of God. How tempting is it for us to trade in a rich, biblical, I would say profoundly subversive and countercultural idea of God and accept a far easier idea of God? A God that, appeals to our own political proclivities. A more Republican God, more American God, a white God, black God, Asian God, brown God. How easy is it for us to do that? I think it's very easy. And this text should warn us against that. These are the reasons that the wrath of God has come. These are the reasons that Christ died, was to save you from this. How easy is it for us to listen to leaders and teachers with no discretion, but simply because they're scratching an itch for us? Maybe that itch is our own social sense of inequity. Maybe that itch is our own sense of social and cultural power being lost. But all of those things are damning to cling to. Not the gospel, though. So you cling to the gospel, allow the gospel to feed your sense of identity. How easy is it for us to simply embrace selfishness to the degree that we're willing to even destroy our brother so that our own T's can be crossed and I's can be dotted? Not portraying any kind of holistic idea of what the gospel means, but portraying ourselves as simply extensions, baptized extensions of whatever our real identity is. And that will always play itself out in how we think about other people. In the prophets, idolatry always leads to injustice. Always. And there's something to think about there. The gospel of Jesus Christ provides for us not simply saving grace, but it embeds us into one another. We become this group of people, this covenant people, who now function to testify together to the reality of the gospel. When you read the scriptures asking yourself, what about the gospel am I believing? What about the gospel am I not believing? What am I struggling with? Am I leaning away towards the biblical perception of God and embracing a more cultural perception of God? What do I not believe in the gospel? Am I walking away from the things that I know are true and embracing the things that just feel safe? What am I not believing in the gospel? Do I genuinely hate people who don't believe the same way I do? What in the world are you not believing in the gospel? Because the gospel does not provide that. That is not the fruit of the gospel. Embrace the reality of the wrath of God, and embrace the reality that that wrath has been exhausted in Christ, and allow that to shape you, form you, provide you a way forward so that God would be glorified in all you do, in all that, to refer back to my southern grammatical upbringing, all that y'all do. The entirety of the church, a testimony to the grace of God that has absorbed and appeased the wrath of God. Father, in the name of Christ, thank you for this fellowship, and I ask that you would bless them and keep them and cause your face to shine on them, that you may be glorified in their midst. In the name of Christ, amen.